Okay, here's our second video on square roots. And here we have the square root of 64, and we know from the last video that we know the square root of 64 is 8 and negative 8. So 8 times 8 is 64, and negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. So the square roots will have two answers. And we estimated square roots also. So let's look at one. Say we had the square root of 65. Okay, fix that. So if we had the square root of 64, we know the square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. So we have 65. The square root of 65 is between these two numbers, and it's much closer to the square root of 64. Bring that over a little bit. So since it's much closer, we can say it's about, use this sign, about 8.1. Let's fix that 8. 8.1, about 8.1. Okay, and how do we know which ones to use? 0.1, 0.2. Well, we know that if we have 0.5 of anything, we round it up to the next number. So we can use 0.1 or 0.2, 0.3 or 0.4 when we're dealing with numbers that are closer to the lower number. So before we had the square root of 65, and it's very close to the square root of 64, so we can use 0.1. I'll erase this. Okay, so let's say we had the square root of, say, 42. So we have the square root of 36. We know that's 6. And the square root of 49 we have as 7. So square root of 42 is between these two numbers. So let's look. From 36, it's 6 away. And from 49, 7 away. So we know it's closer to 36, but it's almost close to 49. So we can say it's about 6.4. That could be a good guess. We wouldn't say 6.1, because that means it's very close. So you got to use some common sense and judgment. Okay, and we can also estimate to the nearest tenth. So this is the tenth here, but instead of just guessing that it's 6.4, we can actually get closer to it. So let's look at some. So if we had the square root, we'll just use the square root of 30 for now. What two numbers are between that? Well, we have the square root of 25. We know that's 5. And the square root of 36 is 6. So it's 6 away from 36, but it's only 5 away from the square root of 25. So again, we can roughly say it's about 5.4, because it's almost half. Almost half. If it was half, we would say 5.5, and if it was more than half, we can say 5.6 and so forth. Just use your judgment. Now, let's look at this at 5.4 for a minute. So let's go back to the square root of 30. I'll erase this. So we're saying the square root of 30, and we know it's bigger than 5, because 5 would be 25. So we can use the numbers 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4. Okay, so let's say you just thought it was 5.4, and that's a pretty good estimate. But what you can do is you can just take 5.1 and 5.2 and 5.3 and 5.4 and square them. So 5.1 squared, just multiply them. Same with 5.2 squared, and so forth. So with 5.1 squared, you can use a calculator or just multiply them, you'll get something like 26.01. Okay, well I'm trying to get near 30. And 5.2, it's 27.04. So, and then we can do 5.3 squared. Right, and we'll get something like 28.09. So at 5.4 squared, we'll get 29.16. Very close. You can see that. Now, what if we did 5.5 squared? 5.5 squared is too much. It's 30.25. So we can see that we did a pretty good estimate with 5.4. So let's do a few others. Okay, let's say the square root, bring this down. If you can see it, the square root of 111. Okay, let's estimate first. What two perfect squares fit? Well, we have, let's look here, square root of 100 we know is 10, and the square root of 121 is 11. So there's our two numbers. It's between these two numbers. So it's 11 away here, but it's only 10 away there. So it's closer to the square root of 121. Not by much. So we can say this is going to be about either 10.5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. And it seems like it may be 10.5 or 10.6. We're just estimating now because if you look about it, 11 and 10 is almost half. It's not that closer to 121 as it is to 100. Even though it is closer, it's not by much. So let's try 10.5 squared and 10.6 squared and see which one you get. What do you think? Try that out. So if you did 10.5 squared, okay, you'll get about 110.25, very close to 111. And if you did 10.6 squared, you'll go over. So we can say it's closer to 10.5. Here's 110, and we want to know the square root of 111. So we can even add the 100th place if we want, 10.51, and so forth. Okay, that's estimating square roots with the tenths, and we'll do more square roots in part 3. Great job.